The deafening crack of a gunshot echoed through Willow Creek as Grace Blackburn stood frozen on the dusty Main Street, her heart pounding against her ribs like a wild Mustang. The whispers had followed her into town, whispers that would determine her fate in this unforgiving place where reputations were as fragile as morning dew and twice as quick to evaporate under the harsh western sun. Montana Territory, 1876. Grace had arrived just 3 days prior, her life's belongings packed into 2 modest trunks, her past tucked away even more tightly. At 26, she was neither young enough to be considered fresh-faced nor established enough to command respect without question. The bullet had struck the wooden post just inches from her head, a warning, not an attempt on her life, but message enough. "Didn't think you'd show your face in these parts, Miss Blackburn," called Sheriff Dawson, holstering his pistol as he sauntered toward her. "Thought the telegraph might have reached you. We don't take kindly to your sort." Grace stood straighter, her honey-brown hair whipping around her face in the autumn wind. "My sort, Sheriff? And what sort might that be? Broken goods?" He spat on the ground near her boots. "Woman who's been passed around more than a bottle at a wake. Heard about your troubles in Denver." The crowd that had gathered murmured, and Grace felt each syllable like a physical blow. The rumors had arrived before her twisted, exaggerated tales of a scandal that wasn't even hers to bear. She'd come to Willow Creek for a fresh start, to take over the modest dress shop her late aunt had left her, not to face the same prejudice that had driven her from Colorado. "Those are lies," she said, voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "And even if they weren't, I fail to see how my past concerns anyone in Willow Creek." "Everything concerns everyone in a town this size," the sheriff replied. "You might want to consider moving on." A deep voice cut through the tension. "That's enough, Dawson." The crowd parted as a tall figure approached on horseback, dust swirling around the powerful chestnut stallion. The man dismounted with fluid grace that belied his size. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but Grace could see a strong jaw covered with several days' worth of stubble and eyes the color of a summer storm. "This isn't your business, O'Malley," the sheriff warned. "You firing warning shots at unarmed women in the middle of town." "I reckon that makes it everyone's business." The stranger O'Malley moved to stand between Grace and the sheriff. "Miss here has as much right to be in Willow Creek as anyone." Sheriff Dawson's face flushed red with anger. "You don't know what she is." "Then she's the only kind I'll ever buy again," O'Malley replied, his voice carrying easily to the onlookers. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by stunned silence. Grace stared at the stranger's broad back, unsure whether to be grateful for his intervention or furious at his presumption. Who was this man to speak for her, to claim her, even in jest? The sheriff looked between them, then spat again. "Your reputation's not much better than hers, O'Malley." "Birds of a feather, I suppose." He turned and walked away, the crowd reluctantly dispersing along with him. Only when they were relatively alone did the stranger turn to face Grace. He removed his hat, revealing tousled dark hair and a face more handsome than was fair for any man who just publicly associated himself with a woman of supposedly questionable virtue. "Kieran O'Malley," he introduced himself with a slight nod. "Owner of the Broken Spoke Ranch about 10 miles east." "Grace Blackburn," she replied cautiously. "And I didn't need saving, Mr. O'Malley." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Didn't look that way from where I was standing, but I'll take your word for it." He glanced at the bullet hole in the post. "Sheriff's got a temper when he's been drinking, which is most days since his wife left." Grace smoothed her skirts, trying to regain her composure. "Thank you for your intervention, regardless of whether I needed it. But I should warn you, associating with me might not be good for your standing in town." Kieran O'Malley laughed, a rich sound that seemed to warm the air around them. "Miss Blackburn, my standing in town was decided long before you arrived. Some folks here have long memories and short tempers." He replaced his hat. "Where are you staying?" "The boarding house on Elm," she answered, then added quickly, "But I can find my own way, thank you. Never suggested otherwise." He mounted his horse with practiced ease. "Word of advice, though Willow Creek warms up to newcomers eventually, but they'll test you first. Stand your ground." He tipped his hat. "Good day, Miss Blackburn." As he rode away, Grace realized she was still standing in the middle of the street, her heart racing not from fear now but from something altogether different. Something dangerous. She'd come to Willow Creek to escape her past, not to find a future. Especially not with a man who looked at her like Kieran O'Malley, just had like he could see every secret she'd ever kept, and didn't mind a single one of them. Grace shook off the feeling and headed toward her aunt's shop. She had work to do, a life to rebuild, and no time for cowboys with storm-gray eyes and misplaced gallantry. The dress shop was exactly as her aunt's solicitor had described, small but well-positioned on the main street, with living quarters above. The bell jangled as Grace entered, dust motes dancing in the sunlight that streamed through the windows. Bolts of fabric lined one wall, a cutting table dominated the center, and a few finished dresses hung on display. Grace ran her fingers over a length of blue calico, appreciating the quality. Aunt Harriet had good taste, at least. The shop could be successful with some work and new designs. She'd trained under one of Denver's finest dressmakers before everything fell apart. Those skills would serve her well here. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. A young woman stood there, perhaps 18 or 19, with bright red hair and a hesitant smile. "Miss Blackburn, I'm Molly Winters. I worked for your aunt before she passed." The girl twisted her hands nervously. "I was hoping, that is, if you're keeping the shop open, I'd like to continue my position." Grace smiled, grateful for the friendly face. "Please come in. I'd be delighted to have you stay on. You must tell me everything about how my aunt ran things." Molly visibly relaxed. "Oh, thank you. Some folks said you might not want to stay after." She trailed off, blushing furiously. "After the sheriff's welcome," Grace finished for her. "It will take more than that to drive me away." "Mr. O'Malley standing up for you will help," Molly offered. "He's respected even if some don't care for his ways." "And what ways are those?" Grace found herself asking before she could stop the words. Molly's eyes widened slightly. "Oh, he's not bad or anything, just different. Came here about 5 years ago, bought the old Peterson place when no one else would touch it, turned it into one of the most successful ranches in the territory. Keeps to himself mostly, except when he brings cattle to market or comes in for supplies." "And why would defending me not damage his reputation further?" The young woman looked uncomfortable. "Well, there was talk when he first came, some trouble back east, they say. And he employs men others won't, former soldiers from both sides of the war, a Chinese cook, even a couple of freed slaves. People whisper, but he pays his debts and his taxes, and his beef is the best for 100 miles. Grace absorbed this information, finding herself both intrigued and wary. A man with his own past, defending a woman rumored to have one as well. It seemed like the beginning of a story she'd be wise to avoid becoming part of. "Well, his business is his own," Grace said firmly. "As mine is mine. Now tell me about our current orders and inventory." The next few days passed in a flurry of activity as Grace took stock of the shop, reviewed the accounts, and began designing new pieces to attract customers. Molly proved invaluable, knowing all the town's residents and their preferences. Despite the sheriff's warning, a few curious women ventured in, some leaving with orders placed. On Friday afternoon, the bell over the door jangled, and Grace looked up to find Kieran O'Malley filling the doorway. He removed his hat as he stepped inside, looking somewhat out of place among the feminine surroundings. "Mr. O'Malley," Grace acknowledged, setting aside the lace she'd been examining. "What brings you to a dress shop?" "Not shopping for myself, if that's what you're wondering," he replied with that hint of a smile. "My housekeeper's birthday is coming up. Thought she might appreciate something that isn't covered in ranch dust." "How thoughtful." Grace moved toward the finished dresses. "What size is she?" "About your height, but..." He gestured vaguely with his hands, indicating a more substantial figure. I see. Grace selected a practical but well-made navy dress with subtle embroidery at the collar. Something like this, perhaps, Kieran examined it critically. It's missing something, Mrs. Chen appreciates a bit of color. Grace raised an eyebrow, surprised at his attention to such details. Perhaps some red trim, I could add it here and here. She indicated the cuffs and collar. Perfect, he nodded approvingly. How long would that take? I can have it ready by Tuesday. I'll return then. He hesitated, then asked, How are you finding Willow Creek, Miss Blackburn? The town has been cautiously welcoming, Grace replied diplomatically. Kieran's eyes, which indeed reminded her of storm clouds, seemed to see right through her polite answer. Meaning no one's fired any more warning shots, but they're crossing the street to avoid your shop. Grace couldn't help but laugh at his bluntness. Something like that. It'll change. You just need to outlast their curiosity and suspicion. Voice of experience, Mr. O'Malley. Let's just say I understand what it's like to arrive with a reputation preceding you. He placed his hat back on his head. Tuesday, then. As promised, he returned on Tuesday afternoon to collect the dress. Grace had taken special care with the alterations and trim, though she told herself it was professional pride, not a desire to impress the rancher. Mrs. Chen will be pleased, Kieran said, examining the finished garment. He paid the full amount without haggling, then added, There's a harvest dance at the town hall this Saturday. Whole community attends. Grace folded tissue paper over the dress. I've heard mention of it. Will you be going? She looked up, surprised. I hadn't planned on it. I'm not sure I'd be welcome. You won't be welcome if you don't show up, Kieran pointed out. These folks need to see you're here to stay, not hiding. Grace tied string around the package with more force than necessary. I'm not hiding, Mr. O'Malley. I'm being practical. Call me Kieran, he said. And sometimes the practical thing is to face what scares you. I'm not scared, she insisted, pushing the package across the counter. Then I'll see you Saturday. He took the package and left before she could argue further. Grace stared at the closed door, irritation and something warmer coursing through her. The man was infuriating and compelling in a way that made her nervous. You should go, Molly said from the back of the shop where she'd been pretending not to listen. The dance is wonderful, and Mr. O'Malley's right, it would show everyone you're not intimidated. Grace sighed. Perhaps. By Saturday evening, Grace had decided to attend the dance, though she told herself it was for the sake of her business, not because of Kieran O'Malley's challenge. She wore one of her own designs, a forest green dress that complemented her eyes and honey brown hair. Modest enough for a small town, but with details that showcased her skill as a dressmaker. The town hall was decorated with autumn leaves and harvest bounty, lanterns casting a warm glow over the gathered townspeople. Conversation stuttered briefly when Grace entered, but resumed quickly enough. She kept her chin high as she made her way to a table with punch. You came. She turned to find Kieran standing behind her, looking more polished than she'd seen him before in a clean black coat and string tie. His hair was still a bit too long to be fashionable, but it suited him. It seemed like good business sense, she replied. Of course. He handed her a cup of punch. Business. The band struck up a lively tune and couples began to fill the dance floor. Grace watched, tapping her foot slightly to the rhythm. Would you dance with me, Miss Blackburn? Kieran asked suddenly. For business purposes, naturally. Grace hesitated. Dancing with the one man in town who'd publicly defended her would certainly make a statement, though whether it would help or hurt her standing remained to be seen. I suppose one dance wouldn't hurt my business interests, she finally said. Kieran's hand was warm and calloused as it closed around hers, leading her to the dance floor. He moved with surprising grace for such a large man, guiding her through the steps of the country dance with confidence. You dance well for a rancher, Grace observed. My mother insisted all her sons learn, he explained. Said no O'Malley would shame her by clomping around a dance floor like a draft horse. Sons, you have brothers, a shadow crossed his face. Had two, both gone now. I'm sorry, Grace said softly. It was a long time ago. His hand tightened slightly on hers as they turned. What about you? Family? Just my aunt, and she's gone now. My parents died when I was young. The music shifted to a slower waltz, and without asking, Kieran adjusted his hold, drawing her slightly closer. Grace knew she should step away. This dance was far more intimate than the previous one, but found herself unwilling to break the connection. Is it true? She asked suddenly. What they say about you having trouble back east? His expression remained neutral, but his eyes darkened. Some of it. Which parts? The parts that matter. He studied her face. Is what they say about you true? Grace stiffened. No, not the way they tell it. I didn't think so. They danced in silence for several measures, the room around them fading away as Grace found herself lost in the rhythm and the steady pressure of Kieran's hand at her waist. People will talk about us dancing, she murmured. People talk regardless, he replied. Might as well give them something worth discussing. As the music ended, Sheriff Dawson approached, his face flushed from drink and displeasure. Quite cozy with our new resident, aren't you, O'Malley? Kieran's body tensed, but his voice remained even. Just being neighborly, Sheriff. Neighborly, Dawson sneered. That what they called it in Denver, Miss Blackburn? Being neighborly with your employer's husband? Grace felt the blood drain from her face. So that was the specific rumor that had followed her, twisted from an unwanted advance she'd rejected into an affair she'd initiated. Before she could respond, Kieran stepped forward. You're drunk, Dawson. Go home before you embarrass yourself further. The sheriff's hand drifted toward his gun. Defending her honor, bit late for that, wouldn't you say? Several men moved closer, sensing trouble. The music had stopped and the entire room was watching the confrontation. There's nothing to defend, Grace said clearly, finding her voice. Because there was no impropriety in Denver, despite what rumors may claim. I rejected my employer's husband's advances, and he retaliated by spreading lies. I left rather than fight a battle I couldn't win against a powerful man. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the townspeople. I came to Willow Creek to start fresh, to run my aunt's shop with honesty and hard work. Judge me on what I do here, not on lies told about me elsewhere. A long silence followed her words. Then Martha Williams, the banker's wife and one of the town's most respected women, stepped forward. Well said, Miss Blackburn, and might I say that dress is exquisite. I'd like to commission something similar if you have the time. The tension in the room broke. Sheriff Dawson, finding himself suddenly without support, muttered something and stalked out. Conversations resumed and the band began playing again. Kieran leaned close to Grace's ear. Brave thing you just did. Necessary, she corrected, though she was trembling slightly. Thank you for standing with me. Always, he said, and something in his tone made her look up sharply. There was an intensity in his eyes that both thrilled and frightened her. Mr. O'Malley, Kieran, we barely know each other. I know enough, he replied. I know you're strong enough to start over in a town where you're unwelcome. I know you're skilled enough at your craft to impress Martha Williams, who imports most of her wardrobe from San Francisco. And I know you've got more honesty in your little finger than most people have in their entire bodies. Grace felt herself flush. You see too much good in me. Or maybe you see too little. He offered his arm. May I escort you home? I think you've made your point for one evening. The walk back to her shop was quiet, the night air cool against Grace's flushed skin. At her door, she turned to thank him. Will you be all right? Kieran asked. Dawson seemed particularly set against you. He'll get over it, or he won't, Grace said with more confidence than she felt. Either way, I'll manage. Kieran studied her face in the moonlight. I believe you will. He took her hand and very properly pressed his lips to her knuckles. Good night, Grace Blackburn. The gesture, formal as it was, sent a shiver up her arm. Good night, Kieran O'Malley. As she watched him walk away, Grace knew she was in danger of falling for this enigmatic rancher, a man with his own secrets and shadows. It would be wiser to focus on her business, on establishing herself in Willow Creek without complications. But wisdom, she was beginning to suspect, might be overrated. The following weeks brought a steady increase in business as word spread about the quality of Grace's work. The confrontation at the dance seemed to have shifted public opinion somewhat in her favor, or at least created enough curiosity that women were willing to enter her shop. Kieran came to town every Saturday, ostensibly for supplies, but he always found time to stop by the dress shop. Sometimes he brought small gifts, fresh eggs from his ranch's hens, a particularly fine piece of leather he thought she might use for trim, once even wildflowers he'd picked along the trail. Grace found herself looking forward to his visits more than she cared to admit. They talked of everyday things, the weather, local gossip, books they'd read, never delving too deeply into either of their pasts. It was a careful dance, this growing friendship, both of them aware of the boundaries they weren't crossing. One crisp November morning, as Grace was opening the shop, Sheriff Dawson appeared at her door, looking more sober and serious than she'd yet seen him. "Miss Blackburn," he said stiffly, "got a telegraph for you." He handed her a yellow paper. Came marked urgent. Grace took it with trepidation, thanking him automatically. As she read the brief message, her blood ran cold. "Coming to collect what you stole. Stop arriving Willow Creek November 15th. Stop Montgomery. Bad news?" the sheriff asked, watching her face closely. Grace composed her features quickly. "Just business matters from Denver. Thank you for delivering it." Dawson nodded, still studying her. "Anything I should know about as sheriff?" "Nothing that concerns Willow Creek," she assured him, though her mind was racing. November 15th was just 3 days away. After the sheriff left, Grace locked the shop door and leaned against it, the telegraph crumpled in her trembling hand. James Montgomery, her former employer's husband, was coming. And he still believed she had stolen the ruby pendant that had gone missing the day she left Denver. The irony was bitter. She'd been accused of being Montgomery's mistress, when in truth she'd fled his unwanted advances. Then accused of stealing the pendant when it had likely been taken by Montgomery himself to frame her after she spurned him. She'd left Denver rather than face public humiliation and possible arrest, the word of a dressmaker against that of one of the city's wealthiest men. But now he was coming to Willow Creek, perhaps thinking she'd sold the pendant to fund her new life. He would destroy the reputation she was carefully rebuilding, maybe even have her arrested. Grace needed to leave. Again. Start over somewhere else, somewhere Montgomery wouldn't find her. The thought brought an unexpected ache. In just a few short weeks, Willow Creek had begun to feel like home. She'd made connections, Molly, some of her customers, and of course Kieran. Especially Kieran. She couldn't bear to leave without at least saying goodbye to him. And perhaps he would understand better than most what it meant to run from one's past. Decision made, Grace quickly packed a small bag with essentials. She left a note for Molly explaining that an emergency required her immediate departure, along with 2 months' wages and a letter of recommendation. Then she locked up the shop and headed to the livery stable to hire a horse and wagon. The journey to Broken Spoke Ranch took nearly 2 hours over increasingly rough terrain. When Grace finally crested a hill and saw the ranch spread out below, she was struck by its beauty and order. A large 2-story house stood in the center, surrounded by barns, corrals, and bunkhouses. Cattle grazed in distant fields, and smoke rose from several chimneys. As she drove the wagon into the yard, several ranch hands stopped their work to watch her approach. A Chinese man emerged from what appeared to be a cookhouse, wiping his hands on an apron. "May I help you, miss?" he asked politely. "I'm looking for Mr. O'Malley," Grace said, suddenly uncertain of her impulsive decision to come here. "Boss is out checking the north pasture fence with Miguel," one of the cowboys offered. "Should be back before sundown." The Chinese man, who Grace assumed must be Mrs. Chen's husband, stepped forward. "You are Miss Blackburn?" "Yes, from the dress shop. Kieran has spoken of you. Please come inside." "You can wait for him in comfort." Surprised to be recognized, Grace allowed herself to be led into the main house. The interior was unexpectedly refined, well-crafted furniture, good rugs, bookshelves lined with volumes. not the sparse bachelor quarters she had imagined. Mrs. Chen will bring tea, Mr. Chen said, showing her to a sitting room. She very pleased with birthday dress, by the way, says you have skillful hands. Thank you, Grace replied, touched by the compliment. Your home is lovely, Mr. Chen beamed. We make good home for Kieran, he good man. Deserves peace after troubles. Before Grace could inquire about these troubles, a small, energetic woman entered carrying a tea tray. She wore the dress Grace had altered, the red trim brightening her entire appearance. Miss Blackburn, so good to meet you. I am Mrs. Chen. She set down the tray and examined Grace openly. Yes, very pretty. Kieran has good eye. Grace felt herself blushing. Mr. O'Malley and I are just friends. Mrs. Chen made a dismissive sound. Friends today, maybe more tomorrow. Young people always so slow. She poured tea. You drink. Wait for Kieran. He will be happy to see you. The Chens left her alone with her tea, and Grace found herself wondering what exactly Kieran had told his household about her. They seemed to consider her visit completely natural, even expected. Nearly an hour passed before she heard the sound of horses in the yard. Looking out the window, she saw Kieran dismounting alongside a Hispanic man she assumed was Miguel. Kieran was saying something that made the other man laugh, his face more relaxed and open than she'd seen it in town. Then he looked up and saw her at the window. His expression shifted to one of surprise, then concern. He said something quickly to Miguel and strode toward the house. Grace moved away from the window, smoothing her dress nervously. What was she doing here? What would she say? The door opened and Kieran entered, removing his hat. Grace, is everything all right? Something about his immediate concern, the gentle way he said her name, broke through her composure. To her horror, tears filled her eyes. In 2 long strides, he was beside her, guiding her to sit on the sofa. What's happened? Are you hurt? Grace shook her head, forcing back the tears. I'm sorry to arrive unannounced. I should have sent word ahead. Never mind that, he said, sitting beside her. Tell me what's wrong. So she did. Everything, the truth about Montgomery's advances, her rejection, the missing pendant she'd been accused of stealing, and now his imminent arrival in Willow Creek. I have to leave, she concluded. Start over somewhere he can't find me. Kieran had listened without interrupting, his expression darkening as she spoke. Now he took her hands in his grip firm and warm. You don't have to run, he said quietly, not this time. You don't understand. His influence means nothing here, Kieran interrupted. This isn't Denver. Montgomery might have power there, but in Willow Creek, he's just another outsider. The sheriff, Dawson's a drunk and a fool, but he's not corrupt. He won't arrest you without evidence. Kieran's thumbs traced circles on the backs of her hands, and you have people who will stand with you now. You mean you? Grace looked down at their joined hands. I can't ask you to face my troubles, Kieran. I don't even know why you would. He tilted her chin up gently, forcing her to meet his eyes. Don't you? I think you do. The intensity in his gaze took her breath away. We barely know each other, she whispered. I know what matters, he said simply. I know you're brave and honest and proud. I know you make me laugh and think. I know I've thought about you every day since I first saw you standing up to Dawson in the middle of town. Grace felt dizzy with the rush of emotion his words evoked. Kieran, let me help you, he said. Stay at the ranch until Montgomery comes and goes. Let me be there when you face him. Why? She asked, needing to hear him say it. Because I'm falling in love with you, Grace Blackburn, he answered without hesitation. And I'm tired of pretending I'm not. The world seemed to still around them. Grace searched his face, finding nothing but sincerity in his storm-gray eyes. You barely know me, she repeated, but weaker this time. I know enough, he insisted. The rest we can learn together if you want to. Did she want to? The question seemed ridiculous when her heart was answering so loudly she was sure he must hear it. Yes, she wanted to know this man, to learn his past and build a future with him. The realization was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. I'm not running anymore, she decided aloud. I'll face Montgomery, clear my name, but after that. She took a deep breath. After that, I'd like to learn the rest together. Kieran's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning, and over far too soon. "Stay here tonight," he said. "The guest room is made up. Tomorrow we'll go back to town together and prepare for Montgomery's arrival." "Together," Grace agreed, the word a promise. November 15th dawned clear and cold. Grace stood on the boardwalk outside her shop, Kieran a solid presence beside her as the stagecoach rumbled into town. She wore her finest dress, a deep burgundy creation that made her look confident and successful. The past 2 days had been a flurry of preparation. Kieran had introduced Grace to Judge Wilson, who maintained law and order when Sheriff Dawson was indisposed. They'd explained the situation, and the judge had promised to be present when Montgomery arrived. The stagecoach door opened, and James Montgomery descended, brushing dust from his expensive coat. He was, as Grace remembered, handsome in a cold way, with an air of entitlement that seemed to expand to fill any space he occupied. His eyes found her immediately, narrowing with recognition and something uglier. He strode toward her purposefully. "Grace Blackburn," he said loudly enough for bystanders to hear. "Did you think I wouldn't find you, that you could simply take what isn't yours and disappear?" Grace lifted her chin. "I took nothing but myself, Mr. Montgomery. The pendant was likely stolen by someone in your household after I left." "A convenient story," he sneered. "I've brought the Denver Marshal's authorization to search your premises and arrest you if the pendant is found." "That won't be necessary," Judge Wilson said, stepping forward from the gathering crowd. "I'm Judge Wilson, sir. I understand you believe Miss Blackburn stole from you, but we do things properly in Willow Creek." Montgomery's confidence faltered slightly at the judge's formal tone. "I have documentation, which I'll be happy to review," the judge interrupted, "along with any evidence you've brought. In the meantime, Miss Blackburn has agreed to a voluntary search of her shop and residence with witnesses present." "I insist on being present for this search," Montgomery said coldly. "As is your right," the judge agreed. "Sheriff Dawson will conduct it with myself and Mr. O'Malley as witnesses." Montgomery's gaze shifted to Kieran, who had remained silent but watchful at Grace's side. "And who might you be, Kieran O'Malley?" he replied simply. "Miss Blackburn's friend." The search was thorough and, as Grace knew it would be, fruitless. Montgomery's frustration grew with each empty drawer and cabinet. "She must have sold it or hidden it elsewhere," he insisted. "Or perhaps she never had it," Judge Wilson suggested mildly. "Do you have any actual evidence linking Miss Blackburn to the theft, Mr. Montgomery? Witnesses? Anyone who saw her with the pendant after it was reportedly missing?" Montgomery's silence was answer enough. "I thought not," the judge continued. "In which case, I see no grounds for further action against Miss Blackburn, unless you wish to file a formal complaint which would require you to remain in Willow Creek for the duration of proceedings and present actual evidence." Montgomery looked around at the unfriendly faces of the townspeople who had gathered. News traveled fast in small towns, and the story of the powerful man from Denver pursuing a hard-working dressmaker had not cast him in a favorable light. "This isn't over," he said to Grace, but his threat sounded hollow. "Yes, it is," Kieran replied, stepping forward. "Miss Blackburn is respected here. She's one of us now. I suggest you return to Denver and look for your pendant there." Montgomery's face flushed with anger, but he was intelligent enough to recognize defeat. With a final glare, he turned and stalked toward the hotel. "He'll leave on tomorrow's stage," Judge Wilson predicted. "Nothing for him here now." The crowd dispersed, many stopping to offer Grace words of support or apology for having believed the worst of her. She accepted their kindness graciously, still processing the fact that her nightmare was truly ending. When only Kieran remained, she turned to him with tears of relief in her eyes. "Thank you for believing in me, standing with me." He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "Always." His eyes searched hers. "What now, Grace Blackburn?" she smiled, feeling truly free for the first time in months. "Now." I think I'd like to see if a dressmaker and a rancher can make a life together. If you're still interested." His answer was to pull her into his arms and kiss her, right there on the main street of Willow Creek, heedless of who might be watching. "I told you once that broken goods were the only kind I'd ever buy again," he murmured against her lips. "But the truth is, you were never broken, Grace, just bent a little by life's storms, like me." "Then we'll stand strong together," she promised, and they did. Spring came to Montana territory in a rush of green and wildflowers. The Broken Spoke Ranch was in full bustling activity, cattle being moved to summer pastures, new calves finding their legs, ranch hands busy from dawn to dusk. In the main house, Grace stood in what had once been Kieran's study but was now her sewing room, putting the finishing touches on the most important dress she'd ever made. Simple yet elegant, the cream-colored silk fell in perfect folds from her waist. "It's beautiful, Mrs. Chen said from the doorway. "Like you, Kieran will have no words when he sees." Grace smiled at the older woman who had become like family over the past months. "I hope he likes it." "Pa, man in love thinks his woman beautiful in flour sack," Mrs. Chen scoffed, but her eyes were kind. "He loves you. Rest is just details." After Montgomery's departure from Willow Creek, Grace's standing in the community had undergone a remarkable transformation. Those who had whispered about her before now praised her courage. Business at the dress shop flourished, and her relationship with Kieran deepened into something precious and real. He had asked her to marry him on Christmas Eve, presenting her with a simple gold ring that had belonged to his mother. Grace had accepted without hesitation, knowing with bone-deep certainty that this was the man she wanted to build a life with. They had agreed to marry in late spring, when the ranch work settled a bit and travel was easier for the guests. Grace had kept her shop in town but spent most nights at the ranch, scandalizing some of the more conservative townspeople, but finding she cared less and less about their opinions. Kieran had been patient, respecting her wish to wait until they were properly married before sharing a bed. The waiting had created a sweet tension between them, every kiss and touch a promise of what was to come. A knock at the door frame pulled Grace from her thoughts. Kieran stood there, handsome in his best suit, his hair neatly trimmed for the occasion. "It's bad luck to see the bride before the wedding," she scolded, though she made no move to hide the dress. "I'll risk it," he said, entering the room. "You look." He trailed off, seemingly at a loss for words, just as Mrs. Chen had predicted. "Is it all right?" Grace asked, suddenly nervous. Kieran crossed to her and took her hands in his. "You are the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he said simply. "I don't deserve you, but I'm grateful every day that you chose me anyway." "We chose each other," Grace corrected gently. He nodded, then reached into his pocket. "I have something for you, a wedding gift." He withdrew a small box and opened it to reveal a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. "It's beautiful," Grace breathed as he fastened it around her neck. "Open it," he urged. Inside was a tiny painting of the two of them, remarkably detailed despite its size. "How?" "There's an artist in Helena who specializes in miniatures. I sent him a photograph." Kieran touched the locket where it rested against her skin. "So you'll always have this reminder of us, of how we look at this moment when everything is just beginning." Tears pricked Grace's eyes. "I love you, Kieran O'Malley." "And I love you, almost Grace O'Malley," he replied with a smile. "Now I should go before Mrs. Chen catches me in here and chases me out with a broom. She's very traditional about some things." He kissed her cheek and left, and Grace turned back to the mirror, touching the locket at her throat. From broken goods to beloved bride, it had been quite a journey. The wedding was everything Grace could have hoped for, simple but meaningful, held in the garden of the ranch with wildflowers everywhere. Judge Wilson officiated, and it seemed the entire town had turned out to witness the union of the dressmaker and the rancher. When it came time for the vows, Kieran took Grace's hands and spoke with such conviction that her heart felt too full for her chest. "Grace Blackburn, when I first saw you standing in the middle of town, refusing to be cowed by fear or judgment, I knew you were someone special." What I didn't know then was that you would become everything to me, my best friend, my partner, my heart. I promise to stand with you through whatever life brings, to believe in you when you doubt yourself, and to love you completely for all of my days." Grace blinked back tears as she responded. "Kieran O'Malley, you saw me when I was trying to be invisible, defended me when I thought I stood alone, and loved me when I believed myself unworthy of love. You call me brave, but my greatest act of courage was opening my heart to you. I promise to face life's joys and challenges by your side, to be your safe harbor as you have been mine, and to love you with all that I am for as long as I live. By the authority vested in me," Judge Wilson pronounced with evident pleasure, "I now declare you husband and wife. Mr. O'Malley, you may kiss your bride." Kieran didn't need to be told twice. His kiss was tender yet passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. The guests cheered, and as they turned to face their community as husband and wife, Grace felt a sense of belonging she had never known before. The celebration lasted well into the night, with dancing and feasting under lantern light. As the evening grew late, Kieran pulled Grace away from the festivities and led her toward the house. "Ready to escape," he murmured. "More than ready," she admitted, her cheeks flushing at the promise in his eyes. Their wedding night was everything Grace had dreamed: tender, passionate, and filled with discoveries about each other that could only be made in such intimacy. As they lay together afterward, Grace's head on Kieran's chest, she felt a profound sense of peace. "Happy, Mrs. O'Malley?" Kieran asked, stroking her hair. "Completely," she answered truthfully. "Though I do have one question I've been meaning to ask." "Anything." Grace propped herself up to look at him. "What was your trouble back east, the thing that brought you to Willow Creek?" Kieran was quiet for a moment, his hand still moving through her hair. "I killed a man," he said finally. "He deserved it. He'd murdered my brother in a card game dispute, but his family was powerful. I was acquitted at trial, but they swore vengeance. I came west to escape the feud, to stop the cycle of violence." Grace touched his face gently. "I'm sorry about your brother, and sorry you had to leave your home." "Don't be," he said, turning to kiss her palm. "If I hadn't, I never would have found you." 5 years later, the Broken Spoke Ranch had nearly doubled in size and prosperity. Grace's dress business had expanded too. She now employed 3 seamstresses and filled orders from as far away as San Francisco. But her greatest joy was their family. 3-year-old Catherine Katie, to everyone, had her father's storm gray eyes and her mother's honey brown hair. And 1-year-old James was already showing signs of having inherited Kieran's height and build. On a warm summer evening, Grace stood on the porch watching Kieran play with Katie in the yard, the little girl's laughter ringing out as he swung her high in the air. James was asleep in her arms, his small body warm against her chest. Kieran caught her watching and smiled, that same smile that still made her heart skip after all this time. He whispered something to Katie, who nodded enthusiastically and ran toward the porch. "Mama," she called. "Papa says to tell you it's time." "Time for what, sweetheart?" Grace asked, puzzled. "For surprise," Katie announced importantly. Kieran approached, taking James from her arms. "I'll put him down. Meet us at the stables in 10 minutes. Intrigued, Grace did as asked. When she arrived at the stables, she found Kieran holding the reins of 2 saddled horses, with Katie sitting proudly atop a small pony. "What's all this?" Grace asked. "A family ride," Kieran explained. "Mrs. Chen will watch James. I want to show you and Katie something." They rode together across the ranch, Katie chattering excitedly about her pony between them, until they reached a rise overlooking a beautiful valley Grace had never seen before. "This land just became available," Kieran explained. "I've been negotiating to buy it. What do you think?" Grace surveyed the lush pastures, the stream running through the center, the sheltered areas perfect for cattle in winter. "It's beautiful. A good addition to the ranch." "Actually," Kieran said, "I was thinking it might be something else." He pointed to a flat area near the stream. "I thought we might build a house there." "A house? But we have a house." "A second one," he clarified. For Molly and David, Grace turned to him in surprise. Molly, her former shop assistant, had married the ranch's foreman David Guthrie the previous year and was expecting their first child. "You want to give them their own home?" she asked. Kieran nodded. "David's the best foreman I've ever had. I want to make him a partner in the ranch, give him and Molly a stake in its future. This land would be their section to manage." Grace's eyes filled with tears at her husband's generosity. "You never cease to amaze me, Kieran O'Malley." "Is that a yes?" "It's an absolutely," she confirmed, leaning across to kiss him. "You kissing?" Katie protested, making them both laugh. As they rode back toward the main house, the setting sun painting the Montana sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Grace reflected on how far she had come from that frightened woman standing on Willow Creek's main street. She had found not just safety and acceptance, but love and purpose and family. "What are you thinking about?" Kieran asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "About broken goods," she replied with a smile, "and how sometimes they turn out to be the most valuable treasures of all." Kieran reached across and took her hand. "I told you so," he said simply. And as they rode home together, their daughter between them and their son waiting in his crib, Grace knew with absolute certainty that this was where she belonged, not despite her past, but because of it. Every step of her journey, even the painful ones, had led her here, to this man, these children, this life. They had both been labeled and judged, deemed damaged by those who didn't know their worth. But together, they had built something unbreakable. And neither of them would have it any other way.